She slid the folder across the table before my grandmother's funeral coffee had gone cold. She tapped it twice with one finger, the way you tap a bill you expect someone else to pay. And she said, "You have 30 days. Someone has to be practical." 6 years I lived in that house as my grandmother's hands. Her driver, her cook, her night nurse. I never took $1 for it. Inside that folder was a deed that said my grandmother had signed the whole house away. On a morning, I now know she spent saying no, and here is the part my aunt could not have imagined. Sitting there in her gray funeral blazer, with her folder, and her 30 days. Today, I read the history of houses for a living. I am a title examiner. I trace who owned what and when, and whether the paper telling that story is honest. Last winter, the history of my grandmother's house landed in my office. I took one look at it, and then I did everything by the book, and the book took everything back. My name is Mara Ellison. I am 30 years old, and if you have ever been the one person in a family who did all of the work and none of the deciding, the one they counted on for everything, and counted as nothing, stay with me, because the woman who told me someone had to be practical was right. She just never imagined it would be me. If you already know exactly the kind of aunt I am talking about, do one thing for me before we start. Type the word invisible in the comments. I read every one of them, and I promise you, by the end of this story, you will understand why that word matters to me. Let me take you back. Just once, one clean jump, and then we will walk forward, together the whole way. 6 years before that folder hit the table, on a cold morning in April, my grandmother had a stroke at her kitchen sink. Her name was Eleanor Ellison. Everyone in the family called her Nan. She was 79 that spring, and she lived alone in the house she and my grandfather had paid off in 1988, a brick 2-story on Dunmore Avenue on the west side of Cleveland. With a porch light she left on every night of her life, whether anyone was coming home or not. My father, her younger son, had died when I was 19. Heart attack in a parking lot. No warning. No goodbye. My mother had remarried and moved to Tampa 2 years after that. And the polite way to say what happened between us is that the distance took. So by the time Nan's neighbor found her on the kitchen floor that April morning, the family that gathered in the hospital waiting room came down to exactly 3 people. Me, my Aunt Corinne, my father's older sister, and Corinne's son, my cousin Danny, who was 13 at the time and mostly stared at his shoes. The stroke took most of the strength on Nan's left side. It did not take her mind. I want to be very clear about that, because everything that comes later depends on it. Her memory stayed sharp enough to correct the physical therapist's grammar. What she lost was the ability to live alone in a 2-story house, and what the family needed to decide in a beige consultation room on a Tuesday afternoon was what happened next. Corinne ran that meeting the way she ran everything. Calmly, reasonably, with a legal pad. My aunt sold commercial insurance out of an office in Westlake, and she had spent 30 years perfecting a voice that made every decision she had already made sound like a discussion we were all having together. She wore concern, the way other people wear perfume. She looked across the table at me, 23 years old between jobs, halfway through the prerequisites for a nursing program I had been saving toward, and she said the sentence that would organize the next 6 years of my life. Mara, you are between things anyway. It makes sense. Someone has to be practical. I want you to notice what that sentence did, Because if you have ever been on the receiving end of one like it, you already know. It handed me the labor, and her the logic. I would do the lifting. She would do the deciding, and it was all delivered so gently, so sensibly, that saying no would have made me the difficult one, the selfish one, the granddaughter who abandoned a sick old woman over something as small as her own life. I said, yes, I want to be honest with you. Part of me wanted to say yes. I loved Nan, the way you love the one adult who never once made you feel like a burden. After my father died, hers was the kitchen I sat in. Hers was the porch light that was on for me. Moving into her spare room did not feel like a sacrifice. That first week, it felt like going home. 2 things happened in that first month that I did not understand at the time. I need you to hold on to both of them, because they matter later. The first was the checkbook. Nan's right hand still worked, but her handwriting had gone shaky, and paying bills frustrated her to the point of tears. Corinne arrived one Sunday with a takeout bag of chicken and a manila envelope, and by the time she left, she had Nan's checkbook, the passwords to her bank account, and a signed form adding herself to the account. Quote, just to help. You focus on the caring, she told me at the door, squeezing my arm like we were teammates. I'll handle the boring part. Someone has to be practical. I remember feeling relieved. I actually thanked her. The second thing was the key. About 3 weeks in, Nan called me into her bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she pressed something into my palm and folded my fingers over it. It was a brass house key on a loop of green ribbon. The ribbon gone soft and pale from years of handling. That was your grandfather's key, she said. The spare stays in the drawer for Corinne. This one is yours. A person should have a key to the place they belong. I put it on my key ring that night. It has been on my key ring every single day since. Remember the key. Remember whose it was. And remember that Corinne never knew it existed. Now, I promised you I would not walk you through 6 years, one grocery run at a time. And I won't. But you need 3 moments from those years. 3 rungs on a ladder, because each one climbed a little higher than the last. And the top of that ladder is the folder on the funeral table. Here is the first. About a year in, I started noticing that the mail had gone thin. Nan's house used to get the normal blizzard of paper an old woman's house gets. Bank statements, insurance letters, the property tax bill from the county twice a year. In its serious-looking envelope, it slowed to catalogs and birthday cards. When I mentioned it, Corinne had the answer ready before I finished the sentence. She had rerouted Nan's financial mail to her own address in Westlake. Things were getting lost over there. She said, you have enough on your plate. This way, nothing slips. It sounded thoughtful. It sounded, and I am going to keep using this word on purpose. Practical. What it actually meant was this. From that year forward, no piece of paper about Nan's money or Nan's house ever passed in front of my eyes, or Nan's again. Every statement, every notice, every serious envelope from the county went to a mailbox 30 minutes away that only Corinne opened. I did not think of it as a wall going up. That is the thing about people. Like my aunt, they never build the wall all at once. They deliver it one reasonable brick at a time. And they hand you the brick. And you say, thank you. Here is the second rung. And this one I need to slow down for. Because a date gets planted here that will detonate near the end of this story. That detail matters later. I am telling you now, so you can watch for it. 4.5 years into my time on Dunmore Avenue. In the first week of November, Nan got pneumonia that turned septic in the space of a weekend. I found her gray and mumbling on a Saturday night and rode behind the ambulance to St. Alexis on the near west side. By Sunday morning, the 1st of November, she was in the intensive care unit. By Monday, she was sedated with a machine breathing for her, and a doctor was using phrases like next 48 hours. She was in that unit, unconscious, from the 1st of November through the 6th. 6 days. I know the dates the way you know your own birthday. And not just from memory, because of a habit that started as grief and ended up as evidence, after my father died with no warning and no paperwork, and a mess that took 2 years to untangle. I had become the kind of person who keeps everything. Every hospital paper that touched my hand went into an accordion folder. I kept in Nan's hall closet. Admission, summaries, discharge instructions, visitor parking stubs, even. If you have ever lost someone suddenly, you know the particular way it rewires you. You start keeping receipts for a disaster you cannot name yet. For 6 years, mine went into that folder. Remember the folder? I barely left the hospital that week. I slept sitting up in the family lounge, under my coat. Corinne came exactly once, on the 2nd of November, a Monday, for about 20 minutes. She stood at the foot of Nan's bed, while the ventilator did its slow work, and she held a brown leather portfolio against her chest, the whole time. The kind she carried to client meetings. She did not cry. She looked at Nan for a while with an expression I could not read. And then she looked at her watch, and then she left. I remember being angry that she brought work to an intensive care unit. I remember thinking she could not even leave the office version of herself in the car. Hold on to that portfolio. Hold on to that date, the 2nd of November, and hold on to this fact, stated as plainly as I can state it. On the 2nd of November, my grandmother was sedated and intubated in an intensive care unit. Monitored around the clock, incapable of holding a pen, incapable of speaking, incapable of consenting to anything at all. There are hospital records that say so. And a copy of every one of them went into an accordion folder in a hall closet, filed by a granddaughter who never threw anything away. Nan surprised everyone. She came off the ventilator on the 6th, and by Thanksgiving she was home, thinner and slower and furious about the food. But something in the house had shifted, and I felt it before I could name it. Which brings me to the 3rd rung, the 11th of March, a little more than a year before the funeral. Nan was having a good stretch that spring, good enough that I could leave her for an hour with her shows and her phone within reach. That morning, I drove to the pharmacy on Lorraine Avenue to pick up her blood pressure refill. I was gone, maybe 50 minutes. When I turned back onto Dunmore, a silver sedan was pulling out of our driveway. Too far away for me to see the driver, close enough for me to know I had not been told anyone was coming. Inside, Nan was sitting in her chair with her hands flat on her thighs, which was what she did when she was upset, and refusing to show it. The good teacups were out, 2 of them, one untouched. Who was here? Nan, your aunt. She said it, the way you name a weather event. Then she said, she brought papers again. What papers? Nan looked at the window for a long moment. It doesn't matter. I told her no. I told her no in November when I got home from the hospital. And I told her no again today. and I am tired of telling her. Then she asked me to warm up her tea, and that was the end of it. She was a woman, born in 1940. Her generation did not narrate family trouble. They outlasted it. That evening, after her programs, Nan did what she did every single evening of those 6 years. She took a blue spiral notebook off the shelf under the lamp table, put on her reading glasses, and wrote in it for 10 or 15 minutes. I never read it. I assumed it was a diary, or lists, or prayers. It was hers, and in a life where she had lost her husband, her son, her left hand, and her front steps. The notebook was one of the last rooms she had that nobody else entered, so I never entered it. Remember, the blue notebook. I'm asking you to hold 3 ordinary objects in your mind now. A brass key on a green ribbon, an accordion folder in a hall closet, and a blue spiral notebook under a lamp. Every one of them looks like nothing. Every one of them is loaded. If you have ever taken care of someone through their last years, what came next will be familiar to you. And I am not going to stretch it out, because Nan would have hated that. Through that summer, she was herself. In the fall, she started sleeping more. After Christmas, the sentences got shorter. In February, she stopped correcting anyone's grammar. And that was how I knew. She died at home, in her own bed, on a Tuesday at the end of March, at 10 minutes past 4 in the morning, with my hand on her hair and the porch light on. She was 85. The last full sentence she ever said to me was, "Turn the light on for whoever's coming." I did. I have thought about that sentence every day since, and by the end of this story, you will know why it turned out to be instructions. The funeral was on a Saturday, in the middle of April, and now we have climbed the ladder all the way up, back to where I started you, at a long table in a church basement, with coffee, going cold, except now you know what I knew, and you can watch it happen, the way I lived it. Stay with me. This is where it changes. The luncheon was ham sandwiches and sheet cake, and about 40 people from Nan's church. I had been awake since 5 arranging flowers. I was wearing the one black dress I owned and my grandmother's small pearl earrings, and I had gotten through the entire service without breaking, because I had promised myself I would not perform my grief in front of Corinne, who had arrived with a photographer's instinct for standing near the casket whenever anyone important from the parish came through. At about 1:30 in the afternoon, when the crowd had thinned to family and folding chairs, Corinne sat down across from me. She set her purse on the table. Out of it came a folder, not a manila folder, a gray presentation folder with a clear plastic window, the kind her office used for client proposals. She had prepared a presentation folder for the afternoon of her mother's funeral. She squared it against the table edge, slid it across, and tapped it twice. "I wanted to do this in person," she said, in her gentle meeting voice. "So there is no confusion. The house on Dunmore is mine, Mara. It has been for a while. Nan signed it over to me a year ago. It was her decision, and honestly, it was the practical one. I am going to be putting it on the market, and I think a clean break is healthiest for everyone. You have 30 days. I've written it all out." I opened the folder because my hands needed something to do. On top was a letter on her insurance agency's letterhead, dated 2 days after my grandmother died, giving me until the 15th of May to vacate the property. Under it was a photocopy of a document with a county recorder's stamp in the corner. The words at the top said quitclaim deed. Under that, In the body, my grandmother's name as the person giving, and Corinne's name as the person receiving. And a date, the 11th of March. The previous year. I did not know then. A fraction of what I know now about deeds. But I knew. That date. My whole body knew. That date before my mind caught up. The silver sedan. The 2 teacups. One untouched. I told her no again today. And I am tired of telling her. I looked up at my aunt, and I want to describe her to you exactly. Because the internet is full of cartoon villains, and my aunt is not one. And the real thing is worse. She was not smirking. She was not cruel. She looked patient. She looked like a professional delivering an outcome to someone who was always going to take it badly. And her whole posture said that my feelings were a weather pattern she had planned around. People like Corinne do not think of themselves as thieves. They think of themselves as the only adult in the family. Every dollar they move toward themselves is just gravity. Correcting. Nan told you no, I said, quietly. On this exact date, she told me you came with papers, and she said no. Corinne's expression did not flicker. She was very up and down that year. Honey, you know that better than anyone. Some days she remembered things one way, some days another. And there it was, 14 words, and my 6 years of testimony was pre-dissolved into the confusion of a sick, old woman. She had an answer ready because she had prepared for this conversation, the way she prepared for everything. And I, standing in a church basement, in my funeral dress, had prepared for nothing except carrying flowers. Then she held out her hand, palm up, and said the thing that I will hear for the rest of my life. I'll need Nan's keys back. It is a liability thing. You understand. Someone has to be practical. Here is what she meant. She meant the ring of Nan's own keys, house, and mailbox, and the shed, which I had been carrying since the stroke. I took that ring out of my purse and I set it in her palm. And I watched her fingers close over my grandmother's keys, 3 hours after we buried her. In a room that still smelled like funeral lilies and coffee. What she did not know, because Nan had never told her, because it had lived quietly on my own key ring for 6 years between a car key and a library card, was that there was one more key to that house in the world. Brass. On a soft, green ribbon. A person should have a key to the place they belong. I kept my hands under the table. I did not scream. I did not cry. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. I have cried exactly once in the 2 years this story covers, and it was not in that church basement. And when we get to it, you will know why. What I did was stand up, thank the women in the kitchen for the ham sandwiches, and drive back to Dunmore Avenue while I still legally could. I want to tell you what I took, because I have replayed that hour 1,000 times. And I have come to believe some part of me knew things the rest of me had not caught up to yet. I took my clothes. I took the pearl earrings I was wearing, and the photo of my father on the stairs. I took the accordion folder out of the hall closet, 6 years of hospital paper, because I had kept it through everything else, and keeping it was reflex by then. And I stood for a long moment at the lamp table, in front of the blue spiral notebook. And here I have to be honest with you about grief, because grief made one decision that delayed justice by 9 months, and may also be the only reason it survived. I took the notebook, but I could not open it. I tried. Standing right there, I got as far as the first page, saw the slant of her handwriting. That schoolteacher cursive with the tall capital letters, and I closed it like it was hot. She had been dead for 11 days. Her handwriting was her voice, and I could not survive her voice yet. So the notebook went into a moving box unread, and the box went into the trunk of my car. And if Corrine had known what was in it, I have no doubt at all that it would have quietly ceased to exist that spring. My grief protected the evidence better than my vigilance ever did. The last thing I did was walk out through the kitchen. Her teacups were still in the drying rack. I left the porch light on. Then I locked the door of the house I had lived in for 6 years, with a key my aunt did not know existed. And I drove away with everything I owned in a 2009 Honda. If any part of that scene landed somewhere personal for you, if you have ever handed over the keys to a place you loved because a document said you had to, I want to hear about it below when this is over. Not yet. Because right now, in the story, I am 29 years old, sleeping on a friend's couch in Lakewood, and I have 30 days of permission to exist. And no idea that the boring little job I had been doing at Nan's kitchen table for 6 years was about to become a weapon. Let me back up one step, because I skipped over something on purpose, and it is time. You may have been wondering how I ate for 6 years. Caregiving does not pay, but rent was free, and my needs were small. And about a year after I moved in with Nan, I had found the one job on earth that fit around a stroke patient schedule. A title agency downtown called Cuyahoga Land Title hired remote workers to index county records at night. Deeds, mortgages, liens, releases, documents from the county recorder came across my laptop screen. And my job was to type what they were into a database. Who gave? Who received? What date? What book? What page? $11 an hour at Nan's kitchen table from 9 at night to 1 in the morning, while she slept and the porch light burned. For 6 years, without knowing it, I was in training. You cannot type 100 deeds a night for 6 years without the shape of them soaking into you. I learned what a clean chain of title looks like, one owner handing to the next, like a relay. Decade after decade, I learned what the stamps mean. And I learned, without ever expecting to need it, exactly what makes a transfer of a house legally real, and what makes it paper trash, wearing a stamp. So on the Monday after the funeral, from my friend's couch, I called the office and asked my night shift supervisor, a woman I had spoken to on the phone, maybe 200 times and met exactly never, whether there was any full-time work. Her name was Ruth. She was 61 years old. She had been examining titles since before I was born. And when I walked into that office for the first time that Thursday, she looked at me over the top of her glasses for a good 3 seconds and said, "So the night owl has a face." Then she looked at whatever my face was doing 3 weeks after burying Nan and 1 week after the folder. And she did not ask a single question. She just pulled out the chair next to hers. Ruth is the person in this story who saved me, and she did it without fixing one single thing, which I have come to believe is the rarest skill a human being can have. Over the next months, she taught me the trade for real. Not indexing, examining, reading 60 years of a property's paper, and deciding whether the story it tells is true. And one gray afternoon that first summer, when a sad file crossed our desks, a widow, a forged signature, a nephew, I finally told Ruth my own story. The whole thing, the folder, the teacups, the 30 days. I told it flat, the way I am telling you now, and I braced for advice, or outrage, or worse, doubt. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the sentence, "I will remember for the rest of my life." People lie in every language ever invented. Honey, paper only gets to lie once. Then it just sits in the county, waiting to be read by the wrong person. She turned back to her screen. Like she had said something about the weather. I wrote it on a sticky note that night, and it is on my monitor as I record this, waiting to be read by the wrong person. Hold that sentence. It is the hinge this whole story turns on. Now, the rebuild. I am going to give you 15 months in one breath, because you already know I survive it. And the interesting part is not the surviving. I moved into a one-room apartment above a laundromat on Madison Avenue, where the dryers ran until 11 and the whole building smelled like warm cotton. And honestly, after that year, I found the noise of other people's ordinary lives comforting. The moving boxes went into a corner. The blue notebook stayed in its box. I still could not read it. And by then, not reading it had hardened into a rule. I did not examine. I worked. I studied for my examiner certification at the laundromat's counter downstairs with a highlighter and a folding chair. I passed it in the fall, first attempt, and Ruth brought a grocery store cake to the office with examiner written on it in gel icing, spelled correctly, which she pointed out was more than she could say for the last 3 people who passed. I got my own desk, my own files, my own stamp-shaped authority over other people's paper. I paid my own electric bill in my own name and felt, for the first time since I was 23, like a person with a spine instead of a function. That is the whole montage. 15 months. The girl who carried the flowers became a licensed title examiner in the county, where her grandmother's house sat quietly in the records, waiting, and Corinne, in those 15 months, did exactly nothing. That is important. And it took me a long time to understand. The house on Dunmore just sat there, empty. She was not living in it. She was not renting it. I know now that this is what stolen things do. They sit. Because the moment a stolen house moves, it makes paper. And paper gets read. For 15 months, her theft was safe, precisely as long as it stayed pointless. And then, in January, a year and 9 months after the funeral, my aunt got greedy, or got a tax bill, or got tired of waiting. And she did the one thing on earth she should never have done. She listed the house for sale. Here is what happens, mechanically, when a house in my county gets sold. The buyer's lender requires title insurance, which is a policy that promises the house's paper history is clean. To write that policy, a title agency orders an examination. A person like me pulls every recorded document on that property going back decades and reads the chain, link by link, looking for the one bad link that makes the whole thing worthless. Cleveland is a big city, but the title world inside it is a small town. And Cuyahoga Land Title is one of the largest agencies in it. So on a Tuesday morning in January, at about 10:15, a new examination order dropped into our office queue, and the property address on it was 4416 Dunmore Avenue. I sat there looking at that address on my screen, for what Ruth later told me was a full minute. Stay with me now, because what I did in the next 10 minutes matters more than anything else in this story, and it is the reason this story ends the way it does. Instead of the way these stories usually end, I did not open the file. I want to say that again. Slowly, the order sat in the general queue, unassigned, and every cell in my body wanted to claim it. And I did not touch it, because Ruth had drilled one commandment into me, deeper than all the others. An examiner with a personal stake in a property is not an examiner. She is a liability. with a license. If I opened that file at work, anything I found would be poisoned. Corinne's lawyer would stand up in whatever room we ended up in and say the examiner had a grudge, and he would be right. And every true thing in that file would die of my fingerprints on it. So I stood up, walked to Ruth's desk, and told her the address in the queue belonged to my grandmother's house, the one from my story, and that I was recusing myself from anything touching it. Ruth looked at me for a long second. She flagged the order, reassigned it to an examiner 2 desks over, documented my disclosure in the file, and then she took off her glasses. And this part, I will also remember forever. She said, "That is the file. This is the office. What you read at the county on your own Saturday, as a granddaughter, with documents any citizen alive can pull, is none of the office's business." Then, she put her glasses back on. Ruth never once told me what to do. She just told me where the lines were and let me notice that everything I needed was on the legal side of them, because here is the thing about my trade that most people never think about. And it is the entire reason my aunt lost. Deeds are public. Mortgages are public. Notary commissions are public. The recorder's office downtown has terminals anyone can use. Free, no appointment, no badge. My aunt built her theft out of public paper because that is the only kind that transfers a house, and public paper is exactly what I had spent 7 years learning to read. Paper only gets to lie once. Then it sits in the county, waiting to be read by the wrong person. Corinne had one wrong person on earth to worry about, and she had handed that person a 30-day notice and a motive. That Saturday morning, I was on the recorder's office steps at 9 when the doors opened, with a legal pad, 2 pencils, and Nan's accordion folder in a canvas bag. What I found in about 4 hours. And I am going to walk you through it 1 page at a time, because I want you to feel each one land the way it landed on me. Page 1. The quitclaim deed itself, the real recorded original of the photocopy. From the funeral, a quitclaim, in plain words, is the barest kind of deed there is. It doesn't promise. The title is good. It just says whatever I own, I hand to you. And it is the favorite tool of people moving property around inside families. Because no bank ever looks at it. This one transferred 4416, Dunmore Avenue, Enu, from Eleanor Ellison to Corinne Ellison Pratt for the stated sum of $10. $10. A brick 2-story. Paid off in 1988 for the price of 2 coffees. It was signed, supposedly, by my grandmother, dated the 11th of March, and recorded quietly 8 days later. I sat with her signature for a long time. It was close. It was very close. And I understood why. Corinne had held Nan's checkbook for 5 years. She had a drawer full of my grandmother's real signature to practice from. But a signature is a movement, not a picture, and this one had been drawn. Not written, slow, where Nan was quick, steady, where the stroke had made her tremble. Whoever made it had copied what her name looked like, and missed what her hand had become. I photographed it. I kept reading. That was the giveaway deed. Call it that. There are 2 more documents coming, and I promise you can hold all 3. Page 2. To be valid, a deed like that must be notarized, meaning a licensed notary swears the signer appeared in person and signed of their own free will. The notary on the giveaway deed had stamped and signed in blue ink. and her commission details were printed right there in the stamp, the way the law requires. I copied the name into the state's public notary database, which anyone with a phone can search, standing right there at the terminal. The notary was a woman who worked at Corinne's insurance agency, a co-worker, and her notary commission had expired the previous June. 9 months before she stamped that deed. In plain words, on the 11th of March, that woman had no more legal power to notarize my grandmother's signature than the lamp on the table did. The stamp on the giveaway deed was a costume, which meant that even before anyone argued about forgery, the deed had never been properly executed at all. That was page 2, and I want to tell you, my hands were steady. I had expected to shake. Instead, I felt the strange calm you feel when a suspicion you have carried alone for a long time starts agreeing with you in writing. Page 3 did not come from the county. It came from the accordion folder, and I had known it was there since the church basement. But knowing and holding are different things, because a question had been nagging at me for almost 2 years. Even a forged deed needs a story around it. What made Corinne feel safe enough to try? And the answer was, in the county's index too. 1 line above the deed. Recorded the same week, filed as its supporting paper, was a durable power of attorney, the permission paper, a document in which my grandmother supposedly appointed Corinne to manage all her financial and legal affairs. Its date was the 2nd of November, the previous fall. The 2nd of November. The ventilator. The 20-minute visit. The brown leather portfolio held against her chest. I opened the accordion folder right there at the public terminal and pulled the St. Alexis admission record, and I set the 2 papers side by side. On the left, a legal document swearing my grandmother knowingly signed away control of her affairs on the 2nd of November. On the right, a hospital record stating that on the 2nd of November, Eleanor Ellison was sedated and mechanically ventilated in intensive care, and had been since the 1st. She could not sign that document. She could not hold the pen. She could not know the document existed. My aunt had stood at the foot of her unconscious mother's bed with the paperwork of her own theft clutched to her chest, looked at her watch, and left. The permission paper was dated from inside those 20 minutes, or near enough that it made no difference. That is who I was dealing with, not a woman who cracked under pressure and made one bad choice. A woman who saw a ventilator and thought, opportunity. That was the moment. I left the building. I made it to my car in the county lot. A gray January noon, salt stains on the windshield. And that is where it happened. The one time in this entire story, I cried for about 10 minutes, alone, with my forehead on the steering wheel. Not for the house. I want. That understood. I cried because for 2 years, in the basement of my mind, a small cruel voice had been asking whether Corinne might be telling the truth, whether Nan really had been up and down, whether my 6 years of knowing her had been the confused part. The papers on the seat beside me said no. Your grandmother said no, and kept saying no, and they did it to her anyway, while she slept. You were not crazy. You were just outnumbered. If you have ever cried from being believed, even by a stack of photocopies, you know exactly what those 10 minutes were. Then I wiped my face, drove to the laundromat, climbed the stairs, and did the thing I had not been able to do for 21 months. I opened the blue notebook. I had been wrong about what it was. It was not a diary or prayers. It was a log. My grandmother, a schoolteacher's daughter born in 1940, had spent her last 6 years keeping minutes on her own life. Dated, in that upright cursive, one short entry a night. And the first thing I found was not evidence. It was the inscription inside the front cover, written large, the way you write something you mean. It said, "For the record, so nobody can ever say." My Mara did nothing. She had been keeping a record of me. 6 years of it. Mara made the bean soup. Too much pepper. Didn't tell her. Mara up at 3 when I fell against the dresser. Never once. Sighed. Mara missed her class registration again this year. My fault. She says it isn't. Night. After night. After night. I had spent 6 years being invisible to everyone in that family with a last name to protect. And the whole time, the person I was caring for had been quietly writing me down. Somebody in that house had been keeping the books after all. It just was not Corinne. I read straight through to November. 1st of November, no entry, and none for 5 days. The hospital gap, which is its own kind of proof. Then, in a shockier hand, through Thanksgiving, and then I found the 11th of March, and I'm going to read you the entry exactly as she wrote it. Because my grandmother deserves to be quoted. See. I'll here again with papers about the house. 3rd time. Told her no again. Told her the house is settled, and settled means settled. She said, "Someone has to be practical." I said I already was, 2 summers ago. And she should ask the lawyer on Ridge Road. If she doubts it, she left, without finishing her tea. Settled 2 summers ago. The lawyer, on Ridge Road. I went backward through the notebook like a woman possessed and found June. 2 summers before that entry. Went with the neighbor to the lawyer on Ridge Road and signed my will. House and everything in it to Mara, copy, in his safe. Didn't tell. See, she'd only start managing it. My grandmother had made a will, a real one, with a real lawyer, witnessed, sitting in a fireproof safe on Ridge Road. And she had told no one but a notebook, because she knew her daughter, and she knew that anything Corinne could see, Corinne would start managing. Nan had not been outmaneuvered. At all. She had seen the whole game years before I did. Played her one quiet move, and left the record, where only grief could protect it. Turn the light on, for whoever's coming. She knew someone would come. She had left the porch light on inside a notebook. Monday morning, there were 2 law offices on Ridge Road, and the second one I called went silent for a moment when I said the name Eleanor Ellison. And then the lawyer himself came on the line and said, "I wondered when this call would come. I am sorry for your loss. I have her original will. Nobody ever notified us she'd passed." Of course, nobody had. Notifying the lawyer was the family's job, and the family was Corinne. And Corinne's entire plan depended on that safe staying shut. The quitclaim deed had never just been about getting the house. It had been about making the will irrelevant. So probate never opened, and the safe never mattered, except a forged deed is not a wall. It is a bedsheet painted like a wall, and now 3 people were standing in front of it holding flashlights. Me, a lawyer, and the entire recording system of Cuyahoga County. Here is what happened next. And notice that not one step of it required me to raise my voice, break a rule, or use my job as a weapon. I hired my own attorney, a probate litigator, with my examiner's salary, and I handed her a canvas bag, the giveaway deed with its drawn, not written, signature, the dead notary stamp, with a printout from the state's own database. The permission paper dated inside a ventilator week, stapled to the hospital records. The notebook. The will. My attorney looked through it all for about 20 minutes, laid her hands flat on the table, and said, "In 15 years, I have never been handed a case already examined." I told her that was the family business. She opened probate and filed Nan's will. She filed suit to declare the giveaway deed void, forged and improperly notarized. And the machine I had worked inside for 2 years began, impartially, to eat my aunt alive. The examiner 2 desks over, the one who got the file I refused to touch, found the same dead notary stamp inside a week, because it was sitting in public view for anyone who looked. And the title agency declined to insure. In my world, that sentence is an execution. No insurance. No loan. No loan. No buyer. The sale of 4416 Dunmore Avenue, NU, did not fall through. It ceased to exist. Then the court entered an order freezing any transfer of the property. While the case was heard, the house that had sat for 2 years as Corinne's silent trophy was now sitting as her Exhibit A, and she could not sell it. Mortgage it, Corinne demanded. A family meeting. I said yes. On one condition, my lawyer's conference room. 11 in the morning. On the record, she arrived in the gray blazer with a lawyer of her own, and she opened with the meeting voice. The concerned tilt. "Honey, this has all gotten so out of hand. Nan would be heartbroken." I let her finish. Then I did what I had watched her do to me. My whole life. I opened a folder, squared it against the table edge, and spoke in numbered statements. 7 of them. No adjectives. 1. On the 2nd of November, Nan was sedated on a ventilator at St. Alexis. Here is the hospital record. 2. Your power of attorney is dated the 2nd of November. 3. On the 11th of March, Nan wrote in her own hand that you came with papers, and she told you no, for the 3rd time. Here is the page. 4. The deed dated that same day carries a signature drawn by someone who never watched her hand shake. 5. Westa, your coworker's notary commission, expired the June before she stamped it. Here is the state's record. 6. As Nan signed a will 4 years ago, leaving the house to me. The original is with the court. 7. Every one of these documents is either public or hospital certified. None of them came from my employer, and all of them are already filed. I am not here to negotiate. I am here so that you hear it from me. In person, the way you preferred it. Then I closed the folder. Corinne looked at her lawyer. Her lawyer was looking at the notary printout and had gone very still. The stillness of a man recalculating his fee against his exposure. And my aunt looked across that table at me, and for the first time in 30 years of managing, her face had no meeting version available. She said, "You were supposed to just move on." Not, "I didn't do it." Not, "It isn't true. You were supposed to just move on." 6 words. And they were the closest thing to a confession I would ever need. And they were on the record. I stood up, and at the door, I gave her back the only thing of hers I had ever held on to. I said, "You were right, Corinne. Someone did have to be practical." And I left her sitting in a conference room with a folder squared neatly on the table in front of her. The consequences came the way real consequences come. On paper, on schedules. Without music, In May, the probate court entered its judgment. The quitclaim deed, void from the beginning, stricken from the record, with a written finding that the instrument was, quote, procured by fraud and never lawfully executed. A judge, in ink, on county letterhead, the will was admitted. Title to 4416 Dunmore Avenue, Anu passed to me, and the estate's accounting came next, because the permission papers' collapse reopened 5 years of bank statements that had been going to a mailbox in Westlake. It turned out my aunt had been paying herself from Nan's account almost since the stroke. $260 a month, labeled management fee, for 54 months, $14,040. That was my grandmother's grocery money for 4 solid years, skimmed by the person who kept telling everyone she handled the boring part. The court ordered every dollar restored to the estate. The dead notary stamp went to the Secretary of State, and her commission is gone for good, and her name now sits in the same public database where I found her, forever findable by any bored granddaughter with a phone. And the fraud findings were referred, by the court, not by me, to the county prosecutor, where they remain pending as I record this. I did not chase that. I did not need to. I had spent 2 years learning that the system moves slowly and grinds fine, and my only job was to hand it true paper and step back. Corinne escalated. Of course, they always do after. When it is safe to feel wronged. 14 voicemails in the week after the judgment. Cycling from honey to how dare you and back. A 4-page email with no apology in it anywhere. Just an accounting of everything she had ever done for this family. Ending, and I am quoting. You have torn this family apart over a house. I answered exactly once. One line, the house was never torn. It was recorded. She showed up at my office lobby once in June, and Ruth, who happened to be walking through, steered her out the glass doors with the calm of a woman who has been 61 for a long time, and then came back to my desk and said, paper only gets to lie once, honey. People will go all day. That was the last time I saw my aunt. Now let me tell you how it actually ends, because it does not end with a courtroom, and it does not end with a reunion. And if you have been waiting for the scene where the family sees the light and gathers around me, I am sorry. That scene does not exist. And I have stopped grieving it. Nobody from Corinne's side called to say they believed me. What I got instead was smaller and real. One text, in July, from my cousin Danny, 20 years old now, who had spent this whole story staring at his shoes. It said, I read the court thing. I am sorry. Mara, Nan's teacups are in our garage. Mom took boxes before you moved out. Do you want them? I wrote back, yes, and you always have a place at my table. He brought them over himself, in a laundry basket, wrapped in dish towels, and stayed for an hour, and we did not talk about his mother at all. That is my one salvaged thread. And I am not pulling on it hard. I am just keeping the light on over it. On the first Saturday in June, I went back to Dunmore Avenue. My attorney had the keys Corinne surrendered, a whole ring of them. But I did not use those. I stood on the porch my grandmother could not climb at the end, and I took out the brass key on the green ribbon, the one that had ridden on my key ring through the couch in Lakewood, and the room above the laundromat. And every day of the exam I studied for on a folding chair, and I let myself in. 14 months empty, and the house still smelled faintly like her. I put the teacups back in the cabinet. I hung my father's photo on the stairs. I set the blue notebook on the shelf under the lamp, where it lived, because it is not evidence anymore. It is minutes of a meeting, that finally adjourned in our favor. And a few weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday at the recorder's office, in the public index where anyone can read it, the county entered the newest link in the chain of title for 4416 Dunmore Avenue, NU. Eleanor Ellison to Mara Ellison by will. Admitted to probate. I did not examine that document. A colleague did. By the book. I just went downtown on my lunch break and read it at the public terminal, as a citizen. As a granddaughter. The wrong person the paper had been waiting for all along. Here is what I know now. That I did not know in that church basement. Some families do not love you. They budget you. They put your years in a column that never gets totaled, and their own errands in bold. And when your usefulness ends, they slide the accounting across a table and tap it twice. But paper does not care whose meeting voice is gentlest. Paper sits in drawers and safes and county terminals. And it waits. It waited in a hall closet, in an accordion folder. It waited 2 summers in a lawyer's safe on Ridge Road. It waited 21 months in a blue spiral notebook, under an inscription that said, "So nobody can ever say, my Mara did nothing. My aunt spent 6 years keeping me off the record. My grandmother spent the same 6 years quietly writing me into it. Only one of those records survived contact with the county. The key is still on the green ribbon. It hangs now on a small brass hook inside the front door of the house it belongs to. Because it does not need to travel anymore, and neither do I." Corinne thought a key was a liability. Nan knew what it actually was. A person should have a key to the place they belong. It took the county a while to agree with her. It got there. If this story reached you because there is a Corinne in your life, someone who has turned your labor into their logic, hear this. You do not have to scream. You do not have to win the argument. At the funeral, keep your papers. Keep your key. Write things down and date them. Because the practical person in your family is only ever as safe as the record is thin. And if this was you, if you were the one who did all of the work and none of the deciding, put the word invisible in the comments, so the others in the same house know they are not alone down there. Because the comments section under stories like this one is the most honest room some of us ever get to stand in. Subscribe if you want to be here. When I read the next record out loud, I turn the porch light on every night. Now, not for anyone. In particular, for whoever's coming. My name is Mara Ellison. My grandmother kept the minutes. I just filed them